There is another trait that is even more predictive of social mobility than schools, and that is family structure. Communities where children are raised by two married parents are communities where kids are vastly more likely to get ahead in life.
Lyman Stone, what an absolute privilege it is to talk to you again, in fact. And you're getting a reputation, as becoming one of the world's leading demographers and commentators on demographics, which is a really great thing. And so it's a real joy to speak to you again. And I wanted to talk to you about something you highlighted recently, a Financial Times article, which was basically looking at some data from Institute of Family Studies and work that you'd done previously, which says marriage is the key to solving the demographic crisis that we're facing. But before we do that, I wonder if I can ask you a question. I was at a conference recently, and you'll be familiar with a chap called Stephen Shaw, who's made a birth gap video, which indeed we've spoken to Stephen, in fact, ourselves. And he spoke on that. But what he didn't manage to do was deal with some of the criticism of people who say, look, there are too many people on the earth. I get that it's going to be awkward reducing the number, but we still need to reduce the number. So let's not worry about the fertility crisis.
Yeah, I mean, there are a variety of reasons that people convince themselves that there's too many humans. Um, some of it's just kind of a general despair and pessimism. I mean, we have a mental health crisis, and poor mental health is really strongly correlated with antenatal ideology and attitudes. I mean, that's true empirically. Other people have other reasons. Climate change worries are a common one, but managing population isn't really part of the solution.
Mm.
Um, for the simple reason that in the long run, to beat climate change, we're going to need new innovations.
Yeah.
And innovations come when you have minds to do them.
Yep.
And to get those minds, they have to be born. Beyond that, I mean, in the short run, reducing fertility does not reduce carbon emissions at all. In fact, it can increase them for the simple reason that when people have kids, their incomes tend to decline because they take time off work. They consume less, and what they do consume, they shift into more services, things like childcare, which are essentially zero carbon footprint. So the compositional effect of having a kid on your carbon emissions is to reduce them. And the kids don't produce emissions for decades to come. And when they produce those emissions, that group of kids will also be producing innovations that we hope will be creating cleaner energy.
So I think in the UK, the latest figures show us at a 1.44 replacement rate, which is effectively reducing the population by a third every generation. And the thing is, Lyman, of course, that isn't a one-off thing. It's a continual thing, which is, heading towards just wiping people out. So, you tell us, so that the repercussions of that, economically, socially, why is it a problem? Why should we address it, first of all?
There are a lot of reasons. In general, as you have declining population and aging population, you do have a lot of problems. Old people don't innovate as much. They're not as entrepreneurial. They don't adopt new products as quickly. So you get reduced productivity growth, basically, which is already an area of difficulty for a lot of European countries. Um, you also have problems with financing like long-term intergenerational transfers, pension programs, things like that. A lot of those problems, they're significant, they're real. They're not the problems I like to focus on for the simple reason that if you then turn around and say, okay, so you should have a baby for the GDP. Well,
Hmm.
maybe not.
Yeah.
I think to me the biggest problem is what it does um, to us as a society and to the people who don't have children that they wanted. And that is, we know from a wide range of studies that when people do not have kids that they want to have, that is, they want to have kids and they don't have them, it has serious negative effects on their mental health, their happiness, their satisfaction with their life. Living in a society where more and more people carry around more disappointment, sadness, and mental burdens as a result of failing to live what they see as a good life just seems like living in a worse society to me. Whatever it does to the GDP, whatever it does to other things, um, what we're seeing is fertility falling below what people desire. And that should tell us that the problem here is not just, oh, people want smaller families, but there's a unexpected consequence. No, people don't want smaller families. Okay. Desired family size is stable. So we're seeing it'll be a growth of disappointment, and frankly, a sense of loss at ability to achieve the good life.
We had a survey published very recently in the Times newspaper again in the UK, a survey of Gen Zers, and they want to get married and they want to have
Mhm.
kids. You know, it's an increasing desire among young people. That's what they want to do. They've tried the other thing and they've looked around them and it doesn't seem to be delivering satisfaction. So they want the other thing. So assuming then that we have a compelling need to address the demography crisis, and there are compelling needs, whether they be social, mental health, economic, whatever else, there are compelling needs to do something about it because it's not just us. It's not a case of, oh, don't worry, we'll just import people from other parts of the world because it's everywhere. And it's a big, significant thing. And now the report that was in the Financial Times recently, based on the figures that you've been working on, essentially said the way to address this is through promoting marriage. So tell us why and how that's the case.
As I said before, desired family size is pretty stable. And as soon as I say that, people say, well, then why aren't people having kids? If it's not that, what is it? And the answer is people want kids, but people don't just want children, right? If I say, how many kids do you want to have? You don't mean I want to have two entities that carry my genes in the world. You probably mean something like, I want to have a family, and that family will include two children or three children or one child or whatever it is you want. But that family probably also includes a spouse. And that spouse is not only a sperm donor or an egg donor, they are a co parent. They're someone who is invested in the creation of the family unit and the family experience with you. And so, what people want is not kids per se. What people want is families. And family, kids are downstream of the first step of family, which is partner. And people aren't partnering as much as they used to. And there's a lot of reasons for that, cultural reasons, things like the rise of social media. There's a million different reasons, but one underlying factor that is quite important. I'm not going to say it's the whole story, but it's definitely part of it. Is that young men's economic fortunes have basically not improved in several decades, whether that's compared to women or whether that's compared to older men. Um, and the result is that young men are really not a good they're not a good gamble for a young woman because you don't know if they're really going to be a stable partner. They're not able to send good signals of their partner value because there aren't a lot of opportunities suitable for young men right now, based on their skills, aptitudes, and things like that. Um, and so fundamentally, we've got to find a way to help young men have less failure to launch, more success to
Yep,
launch, I guess.
yep, yep,
Um,
yep.
that's really a crucial issue. That involves things, aimed at education, we might consider direct subsidies of marriage. That is, there probably are some men who are perfectly good matches, but we need to just provide support to the marriage concept for people to decide, okay, yeah, it's worth making a little bit of a gamble here. Housing is a really essential part of this. We have to find a way to reduce home prices. And to be frank, that means reducing home values. That means destroying a lot of equity for a lot of homeowners. And I know that that doesn't like YIMBY, that's not like a YIMBY way to say that. Like, oh, we need to destroy homeowner equity. But like, if you reduce the rate of growth of prices, or if you even make price growth go negative for housing, God forbid, um, that does mean that homeowners build less equity. But it has to happen if you don't want your society to go extinct. Homeowner equity is held by older people. So whenever homeowner equity rises, it is a transfer of wealth from young reproductive age people to older non-reproductive age people.
There are so many factors, and people are arguing over the factors. I mean, I know um, other people I've spoken to will say, well, actually, people are looking at marriage these days as a capstone rather than a
Yeah.
cornerstone. So something you will do
Yes.
midway through your career when you've got everything else, as
Mhm.
opposed to something you build your career and life on.
Yep.
And other people will say, well, actually, we've diminished the role of motherhood. We've made it look unacceptable,
Yep.
undesirable, a nuisance to society and a burden to women. And how much of addressing those things is also part of addressing in the bigger sphere the
Yeah.
demographic crisis.
Those are very real. Capstone marriage and the shifting social status and value of motherhood, very real phenomena. They're not nothing. And the reality is everything in life touches on fertility. Reproduction is the central gear of civilization. To some extent, they are a little bit downstream of other things, right? Um, if there were more 23-year-old men around who were stable enough to be the foundation for a family, I think you'd see more people believing in foundational marriage,
Interesting.
right? But the fact of the matter is that there are not that many 24-year-old men who are good matches. And so the marriage model becomes capstone marriage because by the time by the time those partners are able to signal their mate value, and this sounds like why am I talking about men so much? And it sounds crude, and it's not for me to say that like other things don't matter, but it is true in every human culture, cross culturally over time. And there's been no change in this over time. We do have longitudinal data on this across lots of generations that women overwhelmingly select husbands who have a very similar earning and socioeconomic status as
Yep.
their fathers.
Yep.
People often say hypergamy, that women marry up. That's actually not true. Women don't tend to marry up. They tend to marry men with very similar social status as their fathers. And so what's going on is women are comparing, whether explicitly or implicitly, they're comparing potential men as mates to fathers. And so when the distribution of age and wealth in society shifts older, that is when older men are earning a lot of money and younger men are not, this makes younger men look like they suck,
Oh, how
right?
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
So the issue is older dudes are doing great.
Mm,
Economically, like in most developed countries, older people are getting richer and richer over time,
mm,
which
mm.
is not like a bad thing per se, but it does make young men look more and more dysfunctional by comparison.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily a case of men not trying hard enough. Although, if you look at the data, more
I think
women are
there's
going to
some of that.
university.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
there is some of men like, video games and porn. What else do you
yeah,
need in life?
yeah. You can
Um,
get and also dating apps. You can go and get
yeah,
cheap
yeah.
free sex.
So, although not many people actually get sex from dating apps. I mean, it's one of these things where it's like it looks like such a big field, and then you realize that like it's
It's the
actually a really
2080, isn't it?
inefficient way to
Really?
match. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There may be some men falling behind, but also then you have to ask like, why are men not putting the effort? Video games, porn, whatever. But I actually think there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. Okay, like if men put in more effort, they do better. But also like even men who put in a lot of effort, the potential like the odds that in your 20s you're going to be a high status man economically are just not very high. Like the returns to effort aren't great for a lot of men. So I think there's a rational choice in which a lot of men, and again, we're talking in averages here. I'm not saying men should just step out and not try anything, but there are particularly modestly educated men um, who they look at the world and they kind of correctly assess that like if you work twice as hard as at your job, guess how much extra social status and income you will earn from it? Zero. Right? So like you might as well just clock in, clock out, do the minimum you need to pay for rent and your video games.
Mm. Although, I mean, I thought historically, statistically, men tend to work longer hours and tend to work harder. You're saying that's not necessarily correlated with more income.
I'm saying that for lower education or lower socioeconomic status men, the types of jobs that they tend to filter into are jobs where, you know, if you can like if you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, on some level, it doesn't matter how much you try to signal, like
Yeah.
I'm passionate about the company,
How
all these
good
things,
you are and how many burgers you flip in your
like
shift, you're still
you're
going to,
not
yeah.
being promoted to management.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, 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 yeah,
um,
yeah.
so this is what I'm saying is that a lot of men basically just realize that like they are
Yeah,
in a dead end.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is really profound because again, we're getting an increase membership of of that class really. Forgotten males who are in the lower demographic, um, and that's having a ripple effect. You're saying through the economy in the sense that And so the other thing before we come back to that, because I'd like to come back to what we do about that, but then the perception is, well, of course, babies are being born outside of wedlock, which statistically, I think in the UK last year, for the first time, more babies were born outside of wedlock than inside of wedlock. And so the perception is, well, marriage doesn't really matter for having children in that case.
But it does. So there, we have this huge problem where people, yeah, they see, oh, a lot of babies are being born out of wedlock, so marriage doesn't matter anymore, right? But there's three components of the wedlock calculation. One is how many people are married at given ages, at reproductive ages. Two is what are the odds that an unmarried woman of a given age has a baby? And three is what are the odds that a married woman of a given age has a baby, right? Okay. So we can decompose changes into these three categories: fertility rates within marriage, fertility rates outside of marriage, and then just how many people are married. And what people don't understand is across almost every country that I have ever gotten the data to look at this on, most of the fertility decline in the last 15 or 20 years is just a compositional shift in the number of people married. Marital fertility rates, that is fertility within marriage, tends to be fairly stable in most countries. Non-marital fertility rates, that is the odds that an unmarried woman of a given age has a baby, in a lot of countries are actually declining. Like in the US, they're actually declining quite rapidly. Unmarried women are just not having a lot of babies. In fact, most of our fertility decline, so we're actually seeing rising shares of births in marriage in the US now. It's not because like everybody's getting married and marriage rates are declining, but it's because the fertility rate of unmarried women is falling so fast. Um, so the reality is, around the world, we are seeing marital fertility rates remain quite high, non-marital fertility rates generally remaining rather low, which means that the effect of marriage on fertility remains very large. Married people still have way more kids. And also that the effect of marriage is causal, I should say. We know that if you look at two people in a longitudinal survey when they're in their teenage years and they have the same socioeconomic background, and if you ask them how many kids they want to have, and they give the same number, they both say they want two kids or three kids or whatever. And one of them, and they're the same religion, whatever, control for whatever you want. Actually, you can even do this with siblings. You can even compare siblings like this and say two siblings, one of them gets married 6 years earlier than the other one. Who ends up with more babies? It's whoever gets married earlier. The more years you spend in marriage, the more babies you have. And I should say, it's really the more years you spend in your first marriage. Serial monogamy is not highly reproductively fit.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And so part of the problem, of course, is that people are getting married later. And so fewer people are getting married because they don't see the point, because they can get, sex online or whatever, porn, blah, blah, blah. Women, they can earn their own incomes. They don't need a man to support them, etc., etc. So what's the point of marriage, sort of thing? And those who are doing it later, so that the window for having children is closing, etc., etc. So a whole cadre of issues. And then the stuff that you spoke about with males just not being a great proposition relative to females, and the aging demographic just spirals that, and it ends up being exacerbated. I suppose the other thing to touch on before we look at solutions, and again, it's not our beef, but if you look at the birth rates as compared to conception rates, the conception rate is still pretty high, but they're just not being born. And that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Now, I will say, so, I mean, in the US, of course, we have a very live experiment on this with the repeal of Roe v. Wade. Um, and so a lot of states now have banned abortion. And what we observe is banning abortion does slightly increase births, slightly. Um, so going from, for a given US state, going from maybe 20% of conceptions being aborted to maybe 5%, because some people still travel out of state and stuff like that, does not give you, those 15% that are no longer aborted, they don't become babies. Okay. They become never conceived. Um, so what we observe is that for every 10, I better do 100, for every 100 abortions you prevent, you will get anywhere from like 1 to 9 live births. Okay. Um, so it's a pretty low conversion rate. And the reason for that is one, a lot of abortions, women who seek abortions also have higher risk of miscarriage and stillbirth. So that's part of it. Um, the other part of it is when abortion is not an option, people use contraception more. Like there is substitution. It turns out there is. And this has been like a huge debate in the academic literature for decades is like how much substitution is there between abortion and like now we know because we have a lot of societies now that
A live
had
experiment taking
abortion
place.
and
How
now they
interesting.
don't.
Yeah,
And we have the
yeah,
conversion rate to live births
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
like less than 10% of abortions becoming live
Wow.
birth. I jumped to abortion because that's like the obvious policy leverage. But there's actually a different element of the conception side and that is miscarriage. Um, Miscarriage, if your family's ever had a miscarriage, you go to the doctor, they tell you, you don't need to feel bad, there's nothing you could have done, probably this was a chromosomal abnormality and the child wasn't survivable to begin with. Like 9 times out of 10 that's what your doctor's going to tell you. But we know from carefully studied cohorts of women where we're like testing them frequently and we test the remains from the miscarriage that this is not true. That only about 40 or 50% of miscarriages are due to non survivable traits of the fetus or the child. The rest are due to other causes. Many of those are outside of the control of a mother under normal circumstances. Some of them are behaviorally manageable. They might relate to any number of environmental conditions. But the most common source is blood clotting. That a lot of miscarriages are just because of throwing a blood clot early in the pregnancy. And to that end, we have medicines that can help with this. Now, nowadays, almost all mothers are told to take baby aspirin when they're pregnant because we know that aspirin reduces miscarriage. Like we know this. Most countries fortify bread and other foods with folic acid because we know that folate reduces miscarriage. Like we know that prenatal vitamins. But it's also the case that miscarriage is highly clustered. Some women experience a lot of miscarriages, and some experience none. And recurrent miscarriage for some women is treatable with small molecule heparin drugs. So, like in the US, it would trade under the name Lovenox is one. The drug is enoxaparin. But there's growing research suggesting that we can actually treat some recurrent miscarriage. If all we did was just like have a good standard of care for recurrent miscarriage, where like after your first miscarriage, we encourage you to just take enoxaparin, we could probably non-trivially increase the number of births occurring in industrialized societies. Not like
Nice.
not like not like a ton, but in the
Yeah, yeah,
US,
yeah,
you might get 1% more births or half
yeah,
a
yeah,
percent more
yeah,
births or something,
yeah,
or which is, it's not game changing,
yeah.
but
It's
it's a
not
lot of
insignificant. Yeah.
and it's a lot of families that don't have to deal with as many tragedies, frankly.
That's really really interesting, and I suppose what you're looking at solutions would be, well, how is it as simple as saying, well, in that case, how do we promote more people to get married younger and to stay married?
Yes. I mean, yes. And there are different, and there's different ways to do that. One is you can just subsidize marriage. And there are countries that have by chance experimented with this, not usually because they intended to, and what we see is when you subsidize marriage, you get more marriage. And those marriages have the same longevity as other marriages, that is the same divorce rates. Um, they, they have more kids than cohabiting couples. They have fewer kids than other married couples. So it's not quite as fertile as other married couples, but it's way more than if they were cohabiting. So,
So
it's yeah.
let me just stop you there. So they have more married, more kids than cohabiting couples, but not as many kids as other. What do you mean by other married couples?
So if you compare, like, let's say that the UK says anyone who gets married in 2026 gets £20,000. We're just going to send you a check for £20,000. If we were then to compare marriages that were in 2026 versus marriages in 2025 and 2027, what we would find is marriages in 2026 probably will have a bit lower fertility than marriages that occurred in 2025 or 2027. But
Okay. Yeah.
If you try to identify the marginal marriages, okay, who are the people who maybe wouldn't have gotten married without the subsidy? They're mostly people who probably would have cohabited without marriage. And what we do see is those people, like, aggregate fertility rises in response to marriage subsidies. Um, and it's largely because marriage does stabilize couples in a way that helps them make the decision to have children. But direct marriage subsidies are not the only way to do this. Housing is also a really important thing. For a lot of reasons I won't belabor. When housing is cheaper, people get married more.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. You know,
Yeah.
because you can move in
They
together. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, people get divorced less when housing is cheaper.
Oh, that's interesting.
So housing is important. Education is important. Licensing that governs occupations is important, because that slows down career progressions when you have excessive licensing and certification not related to like essential health and safety issues. So in general, we need to be thinking about making a society where, where 20 somethings, where a talented 20 something can become an economic elite. I
Yeah.
mean, like that's that's kind of what you need to be thinking about. Is like, how do you create a society
Hmm.
where a talented 20 something really can become like a high social status person?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we don't,
Yeah.
for the most part, live in that kind of society today.
And in fact, somebody was talking again at the recent conference I was at, and they'd done an analysis in the because you have so many great stats in the US. You keep stats on everything. I don't know how you do it, but they were identifying people who had started off in a low socioeconomic group, but had then ended up in a a middle class, high middle class socioeconomic group, and they were looking at states where that had happened more frequently versus states where it doesn't happen, and then they were trying to say, well, what's different about these states where it does happen and those states where it doesn't happen? Social mobility, if you will. So it's kind of that climb for that the male we were talking about right back at the beginning, who's got no status and just thinks there's just no point because I'm not never going to track a female because she wants somebody better than I am. What's the point in even trying? I just play another game. And the thing that seemed to matter was really good schools. Yep. According to this person who was talking about the research, good schools made the difference there. That good schooling motivated people. It taught them character as well as education, and it helped lift them up towards a greater level of aspiration. Right or wrong?
Good schools matter. I'm not going to say they don't. It lets talented poor people rise to the top. And it also has a tendency to identify untalented rich kids.
Yeah.
Good competitive schools increase social mobility, but they can actually, but sometimes at the expense of equality. Um, and the reason for this is because talent is actually not evenly distributed in the world. And that's, we, that just is the case. I think all of us wish that wasn't the case. Like, but that is the case. Um, Now, the other thing is that there is another trait that is even more predictive of social mobility than schools, and that is family structure. Communities where children are raised by two married parents are communities where kids are vastly more likely to get ahead in life. Now, you can debate exactly why that is, how much of that is causal versus selection. I'm not going to say it's all causal, but at the same time, yeah, it really is the case that when children have fewer parental investments because they have just fewer parents around, like their life outcomes are affected.
And this was the other thing that this person mentioned, because of course a lot of these states were in the Bible Belt, and they were saying, well, there were other compelling factors that were driving secure, stable family structures, which weren't often found in the states where the social mobility didn't occur. So again, yeah, absolute, yeah, key factor having those parents. And in fact, your I don't know if you've read the book by your new vice president, who again
Hillbilly Elegy?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and again, even though he had a very difficult background, what he had was somebody in that background who gave him stability and pushed him forward. And that was something which is often not present in people's lives. Yeah. So a huge, huge important factor. So from a policy perspective, then Lyman, I mean, you've the page has been turned, whether you agree with it or not, and we've got supporters from all faiths and none and all political parties and whatever, who just coalesce around this issue of marriage being a good thing. But from a policy perspective, you could arguably say different opportunities in the US now than might have been in place a few months ago. What would your top three policy objectives, if you were in charge to promote marriage, what would they be?
First, you got to end marriage penalties. Most means tested, like income tested social welfare programs create marriage penalties for basically historically governments wanted to support single mothers. Um, but the result is that punishes people who get married. Um, so we have to eliminate marriage penalties. We have to stop doing this sexist thing where we say, well, single moms can't take care of themselves. The government needs to help them. Because actually, single moms are pretty capable people by and large. They can actually do things. And instead, we need to be helping people make the jump that most people want to make and that they need help making, which is into marriage. Um, so eliminating marriage penalties is really important. Um, I think that we could also consider marriage subsidies. I think that the idea that, okay, we're going to give, if two people are getting married, whenever it's your first marriage, you get some kind of one-time, tax benefit or whatever. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Um, I think we could also do things to nudge people a little bit. You know, family structure really influences school completion. So when a woman has a baby or gets married, if she's in school, she tends to drop out. That's bad for her. And this is also telling us that schools are creating anti-family environments. So what we could do is we could take the amount of money that schools are like universities are currently given, and we could say, okay, you're going to get the same amount of money, but now you're going to get less money per student as it is, and you're also going to get extra money for student spouses and student children. That is,
Nice.
the more of your students that have kids or are married, the more money you get.
Oh, interesting.
Now, overall, you don't have to cut funding overall. You
Yeah,
just are
yeah.
redistributing it to universities that
Ooh.
that are friendly to families, and that would create incentives for universities to help students who have children or get married
Yeah,
not drop
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Provide
yeah,
childcare options, provide supports, provide family housing,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Um, because it's quite bad that when women in particular have a family status transition that they tend to drop out. This is like quite bad for their life outcomes, and it's also bad for their children's life outcomes. um, so we want to offset that, and also we want to remove the effect of school in like thwarting family transitions. And so a simple way to do that is just to um, rejigger the resources we provide to universities to encourage them to provide accommodations for family transitions.
And does that cover, so that both those first two things, would they cover things like, so at the moment in the UK, daycare costs the government will pay. If you take all the government daycare costs, divide it by the number of children who use it, comes out to about 14,000. But if you want to stay at home and bring your child up yourself for 3 years, you don't get a penny.
I would eliminate most daycare subsidies, frankly, because as you said, they are discriminatory. Um, if you want to have your grandma watch your kids, um, there's no help. But if you want to have a childcare center watch them, oh, the government will pay gobs of money for that. So what I would do is I would take the money for childcare and I would roll it into general child benefits. Just give it as cash to
So you
everybody
would
equally.
you would give it as cash.
Yeah,
So
sure. Yeah,
because
yeah.
again, there are some people who think actually the state should stay out of family matters altogether and shouldn't be subsidizing marriage
Yeah.
or children or anything like that.
Yeah, so I think the idea of the state staying out entirely is a little bit problematic because the
Yep.
state runs education. The state
Yeah, yeah,
creates
yeah,
regulations. The state intervenes in family life by saying no polygamy. Okay, I'm in favor of that. Okay, I don't want to have polygamy or no, or limiting cousin marriage or whatever. Like the state intervenes in family. Like that's normal. That's good. None of us are like, well, I don't think the state should remove abused children from homes. No, the state should intervene in family. Um, Likewise, the state provides subsidies to certain work arrangements, certain school arrangements, and those impact family. You can't just stick your fingers in your ears and say, nah, 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 the state isn't intervening in family. It is. So let's make sure it intervenes in family in a way that is not anti family. So, given that the
Very
state
good.
does do a lot of anti family things, that is, it privileges non family life courses over family oriented life courses, we need to make sure that there are also state policies that are overtly supporting family because, like, otherwise, I mean, the state is hostile to family across many functions. So, you have to offset it somewhere. So, I'm sympathetic. Like, I don't love the idea of like the state intervening in all these different ways on family life. I also just think it's delusional to think that there is like a libertarian option where the state just doesn't like family courts exist. Like there's a whole branch of the government whose entire purpose is to regulate family life. And that's not going to go away. And I actually don't think there's that many people. There's only like a few like sovereigntist anarchist types who are like, there should be no child protective services at all. So as long as we're intervening in family life in lots of other ways,
Yeah,
we
I
should
think
do it in a way.
Ben Shapiro and people of that ilk are very much government should get out of, but then if they
But
are
even
going to get
he
involved,
doesn't.
they should do it properly.
But even somebody like Ben Shapiro doesn't actually think the government should fully get out of these things. He favors, regulating or banning, certain family forms that he thinks are quite bad for society or for children. He's not out there saying parents, it should be legal to abuse your children. Like, and I'm not saying that either, but I'm saying that like the government has a central role in regulating.
Yeah. And the whole point, I mean, the government governs people. What are people if not members of families? So to say the government should have nothing to do with families is saying it should have nothing to do with people, which is ridiculous because that's the whole point, and it's comprised of people itself. So it's a very interesting conversation, that one. So you've got two great things there. You've got remove the obstacles, which and there are some clear obstacles in our country too. And it's very complicated to do that because, of course, you've got the arguments of, well, you've got kids that are then will end up growing up in poverty and slipping through the net and blah, blah, blah. And the alternative is, well, actually, you're subsidizing single parenthood. And so you've got the marriage penalty, which you're saying let's get rid of. You've got the really interesting idea of encouraging schools and other organizations to get rewarded in accordance with their own family-centered approach to service provision, which is brilliant. Anything else?
I mean, I think cash supports are fine to do and good to do. Also, we should be thinking about retirement programs. Most retirement programs are paid for not by current savings, but by future workers. That's even true for private savings. Like if you think about like the money I put in the bank account, what makes it valuable in the future? Well, say you invested in the stock market. Those companies are only valuable in the future if there are future young people to drive the productivity as workers. So, the problem is that parents don't get bonuses in their calculation, even though they're the ones doing the work to make those future workers. And also, parents have to spend a bunch of extra money to raise their kids. And often they take a break from work to raise their kids. And as a result, the people who are making pension programs solvent, that is, parents, are actually also penalized in those programs because they don't pay in as much. They don't get as much like points accrued in it. They can't save as much privately because they're spending on kids. So we should be thinking about giving care credits. So a lot of countries do this. France used to do it, and then they just repealed it under Macron, and their fertility rate immediately fell. So surprise, surprise.
So
But
explain
the
care credits, explain that just a little
Yeah.
bit
So
further for those who
basically, what
don't
you
get it.
say is if you have a dependent in your household who's your dependent and you're a custodial parent, you get some bonus on your pension calculations. Now, different countries calculate it different ways. But the point is, you get a bonus on your eventual retirement calculation for any year in which you had a dependent in your household. Or based on the number of dependents, you can calculate it different ways. But basically, the idea is give parents a bonus on their pension calculations because they are the ones actually making the pension solvent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point. They're bringing about the next generation. So, there might be the next, and also the next crop of taxpayers. So you might say, well done, you guys. We're going to invest in you because it's going to pay off later on when your kids grow up and start paying tax back.
Well, and the nice thing about care credits is that they don't they don't cost the government any money until the parent is old enough that the kid is probably paying taxes.
Yeah, sounds like quite a long term thing though. You'd have to think, you'd have to be very aware
It is
of
long term, but the reality is that people do respond to these incentives. There's lots of research on different penalties and benefits in tax codes, and especially in pension programs, that shows that people actually respond to them. Not everybody, but there are plenty of people who are aware. That people, you think of like a 37-year-old thinking about having her third kid, okay, or her second kid, and she goes, you know, I was hoping to go back to the workforce. I was kind of weighing it. I was on the edge, did that or have my third kid. And I am worried about saving for retirement because retirement is, it's not that far away ultimately. But if having another kid at home is going to offset the retirement savings I would have made for 2 or 3 more years, okay, maybe I will have that extra kid and then I'll go back.
yeah, yeah. Makes sense. And what about psychological perceptions? I mean, yeah, loads of other things around housing availability and models in Hungary and other places where they've made contributions. And it's a bit early to say whether it's influencing the birth rates yet. It's definitely influenced the marriage rates, but of course, I think it's been going on for 10 years yet, so it's too early to see how many children people will end up compared to how many they had before. But the psychological aspect is really interesting. I was in DC around the election. It was quite interesting because we were on the metro in DC, and a number of times a lady got on with a pushchair, and that you've got seated areas, and people got up, yeah, and so this seat is for you. You're a mum, and the last few days I've been in London, crowded trains, and more than one occasion there's been a mother waiting on the platform with a pushchair, and it's just too bad. We're going to push on the train, and you're just going to have to wait until there's some space, love. And it was almost like there was a real difference in the attitude. There was kind of a hardness towards, well, don't care if you've got a pushchair. I need to get to work, and I'm more important than you are. And I don't know. Maybe there are other subtle differences between Washington D.C. and London, and there absolutely certainly are demographically and all sorts of other ways. But I wonder the perception around how you make motherhood great again, if I can mix up that phrase, but how you recognize people who are literally creating the next generation of humankind, and recognize in our media, in all sorts of other ways, how important and how significant that is. We seem to have lost a bit of that. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that trying to give recognition to mothers, and fathers, I should say, um, is a potentially valuable course. There are a lot of countries that do these like medals for like mothers of 6 kids and stuff. Um, there's no there's no empirical evidence saying that those things work in the sense of actually convincing people to have babies. They might work, but no one's ever found a way to study it credibly. There are a lot of people on the internet who think it's a super cool idea, and so they talk about it as if it's been proven to work. But
But then the culture, if you're a mum, or if you're a woman and you think, well, if I have a kid, I can't travel on the underground because I just never get on a train with a pram. Whereas if you know that, well, actually, it's not going to matter because people are going to make room for me. They're going to give me a priority seat because I'm a mum. Or something else like that. Well, it makes all the difference, I'd have thought. And then tied in with that is the old issue of, well, you don't need to get married to have sex these days. And it was, that's that has to affect things because one of the benefits of marriage, if you look holistically at why married men are more productive, is because they're not spending ages trying to find sources for sex because they've got married, and you know bring on all the jokes, right? But nevertheless, the stats seem to say that married men are more productive, and one of the reasons is because they're not having to go out and look for sex all the time. They can actually focus on doing stuff and
They're not wasting
building and
time on happy
contributing.
hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So there's a lot of psychology there around marriage and around behaviors.
There's a lot of places where there are opportunities to intervene in a way that nudges people to have healthier ideas about marriage and fertility. Um, so, I mean, a lot of people believe that if you delay marriage until you're older, your divorce rate is lower. This is not true. It is true that older people who are older when they get married have lower divorce rates, but this is only true cross-sectionally, not longitudinally. That is, if you look at similar people, that is just people who would have lower divorce rates at any age are more likely to delay. Similar people who choose to get married younger have basically the same future divorce rates. So for you as an individual, delaying doesn't make you more likely to stay together. Or on fertility stuff, we know that people's level of knowledge about fertility and miscarriage and infertility and frankly, like how to make a baby, people actually don't really have good knowledge about this.
Interesting. Yeah.
We know from some randomized controlled trials that when you just give people better scientific knowledge about fertility, that is when you just sit them down for an hour and say, hey, here's the facts on infertility, miscarriage, age-related decline in fertility, success rates of IVF, whatever. People want they want to have kids earlier. They shift when they would like to have kids like a year or two earlier. So there are a lot of places where I think in our sex ed classes should not only be about how to not have kids, they should also be about how to have kids. Um, when we think about all the various ways that we intervene in the culture and ideas of society. For example, some places have governments that regulate things like racial representation in TV shows. Okay. Or like cultural representation in TV shows. Or even if it's not government regulated, you might have influential nonprofits that score shows based on their representation of minority groups. Okay. Um, well, we should do that for families. How many protagonists have kids? How many of them are happily married?
But also, you mentioned in schools, which is really interesting because I go around the country, I talk to thousands of our supporters, and so many teachers tell me that they're encouraged not to talk about long-term relationships in schools. And you think, well, the very thing that brings about the best version of the next generation, that brings about the likelihood of best outcomes for the kids, they're not talking about.
Also, interestingly enough, long-term stable relationships produce the most kids. Um, like stable monogamy is the most fertile form of human relationships. Polygyny, like having multiple partners, does not boost fertility. Women who are in polygynous unions have lower fertility than other women. Men who have lots of partners have fewer children than men who have just one partner. Um, so, if you're worried about fertility, you really want to talk to people about the importance of
Long-term monogamy.
deep, passionate, romantic love that
Hey, right,
lasts.
yeah.
Like it
Fantastic,
sounds
right?
so like kitschy,
It does,
like
yeah.
we're gonna
Yeah.
raise fertility by helping people learn to fall in love. But like it's kind of true.
I know. It is
Like
kind of true. The old stuff
stable
works.
romantic pair bonding is
Yeah.
like real good for baby making.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love the message you're giving us, which is essentially fall in love, get married, and have lots of kids. It's
Yeah,
like
and don't wait too long to do it. Like
and
it
don't yeah, and just
rocks.
get on and do it. Just get on
Yeah.
and do it
Yeah.
now. Yeah, you've given us, Lyman, some wonderful hints, some wonderful tips. Hope someone's listening in the administration up at your end. And who knows? We always say that the UK is, a few years behind the USA, so maybe it'll come and hit us too. Lyman Stone, you're doing some excellent work. Your reputation goes ahead of you. It's fantastic. Keep up the great work, and may you live long and prosper and have many babies.
Thank you. It was great
Thank you for
talking
your
to you. I'm
time.
always happy to come on.
Great. Take care now.